My family told me I'd fail and was a disappointment when I quit college. "You're throwing your life away," they said, but I stayed silent. A year later, their faces turned white when I walked out of that cramped college dorm for the last time, my backpack slung over one shoulder. It felt less like quitting and more like breathing for the first time in months. I'd been drowning in debt, half asleep in lecture halls, and staring down a degree I didn't even want. But when I told my family I was leaving, their faces twisted like I'd just confessed to burning the family home down. "You're throwing your life away," my father said, his voice clipped, like the sentence was carved in stone. My mother didn't even raise her eyes from her coffee cup when she muttered, "Such a disappointment." My brother Jason just smirked and shook his head, already picturing the punchline he'd be sharing at his next poker night. That was the first crack. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a quiet disagreement. Within a week, I started hearing from old family friends, neighbors, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, each one offering the same thin-lipped, pitying smile. My parents had been busy. They made sure everyone knew their eldest son had given up on life. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just smiled politely, nodded when people tried to give me advice, and went home to my small, half-furnished apartment. But every word, failure, disappointment, waste, I burned into my memory. Not because they were true, but because one day I wanted to return them, gift-wrapped. It started small, almost subtle enough to miss. I'd stopped by the local grocery store one Thursday evening, grabbing a bag of rice and some instant coffee when I ran into Mr. Jennings, my old high school history teacher. He gave me that same half-smile my family had perfected over the years. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like he was studying some tragic artifact. "I heard you left school. Guess higher education isn't for everyone." The way he lingered on everyone told me everything. My parents hadn't just told people I left, they'd dressed it up like a cautionary tale. And worse, they were clearly enjoying it. A few days later, I got a text from an old friend, "Emma. Your mom just told my parents you're working odd jobs to get by. Are you okay?" Odd jobs? I was working at a small repair shop, learning everything I could from the owner about fixing laptops, building custom PCs, and flipping refurbished gear online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I was learning skills I could actually use. Then the kicker came at my cousin's birthday party. I'd barely walked through the door when my uncle clapped me on the shoulder and laughed. "So, when are you heading back to college? Or are you gonna keep doing whatever it is you're doing?" His wife leaned in, smiling just wide enough to show teeth. "We all make mistakes at your age. You'll figure it out." I realized then, this wasn't just my family's private opinion. They were broadcasting my life like a soap opera, passing my choices around like cheap gossip at a backyard barbecue. That night, I drove home in silence. Every petty jab, every smirk, every fake smile layered itself into a slow-burning anger. I didn't want to just prove them wrong. I wanted the day to come when they'd have to choke on their own words, smiling through gritted teeth while realizing I'd beaten them without saying a thing. That's when I made my decision: keep my head down, say nothing, and work like hell in the shadows. It happened at Sunday dinner. The kind of gathering my mother insisted was family tradition, though really it was just a weekly stage for my father to talk about Jason's latest achievements, and for me to be politely ignored until someone needed a punchline. I was halfway through my plate when Jason leaned back in his chair, fork dangling in one hand, and said, "Hey Mom, you ever notice how some people get more free time when they're unemployed?" I didn't look up. I knew where this was going. My father chuckled. "You mean like your brother here? He's got all the time in the world to think about, well, whatever it is he does these days." My mother added, without even glancing at me, "At least you're trying to make something of yourself, Jason. Not everyone has that kind of drive." It was the casualness that got me, not the words. The way they slipped those little barbs in like it was nothing. They'd done it so often, they didn't even see it as cruel anymore. I set my fork down, slowly. "You know, you talk about me like I'm not sitting right here." Jason smirked. "If you can't handle a little truth." "That's not truth." I said, my voice calm but low enough to make them lean in. Truth is, you don't know what I'm doing. You've never asked? You've just decided it's nothing because it's easier to laugh than admit you might be wrong. The room went quiet for half a beat. My father narrowed his eyes. Don't start with that attitude. We just want what's best for you. No, I said, pushing my chair back. You want what makes you look good. That landed. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Jason looked away. But I didn't stay to watch them recover. I grabbed my jacket and left, their silence following me down the hall like a shadow. Driving home, my hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I knew I couldn't keep letting them chip away at me, piece by piece. They'd expect me to come crawling back one day, asking for forgiveness. I decided that night, when I came back, it wouldn't be for forgiveness. It would be to watch their pride collapse in real time. That night, I sat at my desk in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the cracked screen of my laptop. My family thought I had nothing, no direction, no prospects, no ambition. What they didn't realize was that I had the one thing they'd never expect: time. I'd been picking up small repair jobs for months, fixing laptops with busted hinges, desktops clogged with dust, smartphones that wouldn't hold a charge. At first, it was just to pay the bills. But I'd been quietly turning it into something more, buying broken tech cheap, repairing it, and reselling it for double, sometimes triple what I paid. That night, I decided it wouldn't just be a side hustle anymore. It would be my escape plan. My weapon. I mapped it out like a military operation. Step 1: expand my skills. I signed up for every online course I could find: coding, networking, cybersecurity. Step 2: build a reputation. I started taking on bigger clients, small businesses that couldn't afford corporate IT services. Step 3: keep it quiet. No bragging online, no hints to friends who might talk. My family wouldn't hear a whisper until the day I wanted them to. Weeks turned into months. I was working 14-hour days, splitting time between the repair shop, side contracts, and late-night study sessions. My bank account, once a flat line of near-zero balances, started climbing. By the 8th month, I'd landed a remote contract with a mid-sized tech firm that paid more in a week than I used to make in a month. I bought my first car outright. Not new, but sleek, clean, and mine. I didn't tell a soul. Every time my father made a dig about wasting my 20s, or my mother sighed about how nice it must be not to work too hard, I pictured the number in my savings account. I pictured the look they'd have when they realized they'd been mocking someone who'd quietly outearned them all. I didn't know exactly what form the reveal would take yet. But I knew this: when it happened, it would be in public, with no way for them to hide the shock. And that thought alone kept me working long after midnight, while the rest of the world slept. It happened at the grocery store, again. I was in line, loading a stack of fresh groceries onto the belt. Not the bare-bones ramen and beans diet my family probably pictured, but a full week's worth of good food: fresh salmon, imported cheese, vegetables that hadn't been frozen for half a year. I didn't even think about it until I heard a voice behind me. "Wow, treating yourself?" I turned. It was Mrs. Carter, my mother's closest friend and unofficial messenger. She smiled, but her eyes scanned my cart like she was looking for evidence in a trial. "Guess you're doing okay after all," she said, her tone laced with curiosity. I shrugged. "Getting by." Her eyes lingered a little too long. That's when I realized I'd been so careful to keep my success under wraps that I hadn't considered small things giving me away. Groceries. Clothes. The new phone in my pocket. I bagged my items quickly and left, but the unease stayed with me. I knew Mrs. Carter would be on the phone with my mother before I even started my car. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a text from Mom. "Heard you're eating fancy these days. Guess you're not starving after all. So what do you do all day?" I ignored it. But it was a close call, a reminder that my reveal had to be airtight. No half measures. No premature hints that would give them time to rewrite the narrative. The only person who came close to catching on was Sam, the owner of the repair shop where I still worked part-time. One night, after I closed a big contract on my laptop in the back office, he leaned on the doorway and said, "You know, for a guy everyone thinks is broke, you've been pretty busy." I met his eyes deadpan. "Let's just say I'm working on a project." He didn't push, but I could tell he knew there was more to it. And maybe that was fine. I trusted Sam. He'd seen me grind from the beginning. Still, that close call with Mrs. Carter made one thing clear. When I finally showed my hand, it couldn't just be about money. It had to be something undeniable. Something they couldn't dismiss as luck or exaggeration. I just didn't know yet that the perfect opportunity was already on its way. It was my mother's idea. Just a casual dinner for the whole family. Which, in our house, meant a not-so-subtle opportunity to parade Jason's new promotion around like a trophy and to compare everyone else's lives to his. I almost said no. Almost. But something in me recognized it for what it really was, the stage. And I'd been quietly building my performance for nearly a year. When I walked into their house that Saturday evening, it felt smaller than I remembered. The walls were lined with framed pictures. Jason at his college graduation, Jason with his first car, Jason holding a plaque from the Rotary Club. My face barely appeared at all. They were all in the dining room when I stepped in. My father at the head of the table, Jason to his right, my mother fussing with a bowl of salad like it needed to be perfect before we could eat. "Look who finally decided to show up," Jason said, grinning. "Busy schedule?" I smiled faintly and sat down without answering. Dinner started the way it always did, Jason walking everyone through the details of his new position at the firm, my parents leaning in like they were hearing a royal decree. Every few minutes, a glance would flick toward me, as if waiting for me to chime in with something equally impressive. I didn't. Instead, I asked questions. "So what's your new salary like? Benefits good?" I let Jason talk himself into a corner bragging about numbers he thought were impressive. My father cleared his throat, looking at me. "And what about you?" "Still, fixing computers or whatever it is you do." I stirred my mashed potatoes slowly, my heart steady. "Something like that." My mother smirked, clearly enjoying the setup. "Well, at least Jason's career has a future. You should think about that while you're still young." It was like watching Annette close. They thought I was cornered, the same way they always did. But this time, I wasn't here to squirm. I was here to spring the trap. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway, hearing the faint ding of my phone in my pocket. Right on time. What none of them knew was that I'd arranged for the evening's conversation to take a very different turn, and the first domino had just tipped. I let the ding from my phone hang in the air for a second, just long enough for Jason to glance over and smirk like he'd caught me checking sports scores during his monologue. "Sorry," I said casually, pulling the phone from my pocket. I pretended to skim the message, then slipped it back and reached for my glass of water. "That was my lawyer. Closing went through." My mother paused mid-bite. "Closing? On what?" I took a slow sip, setting the glass down like we had all the time in the world. "The house." Jason chuckled. "You bought a house? With what money?" I looked directly at my father. "With the money I've been making this past year. Remember how you said I was throwing my life away? Turns out, throwing it in the right direction pays pretty well." They exchanged glances, confused, cautious. I could feel the shift in the room. My mother leaned forward, her voice tight. "Where is this house?" I let the silence stretch. "This one." Forks froze midair. My father's brow furrowed. Jason looked like he was trying to process a foreign language. I continued, my voice steady but warm enough to sound almost polite. "Your landlord decided to sell. I made an offer. Closed this afternoon. Papers are signed. As of now, this property is in my name." Jason's chair scraped against the floor. "You're joking." I smiled. "No joke. I even paid off the remaining mortgage. Consider it an investment." My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father stared at the table like it might explain what just happened. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "Don't worry," I added lightly. "You can stay here as long as you like. I'm not unreasonable. But next time you want to tell people I'm a failure, just remember whose roof you're sitting under." The silence was perfect, thick, heavy, every second another crack in their pride. Jason forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. My mother managed a strained, "Well, congratulations." I thanked her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, I could feel that slow, quiet burn of satisfaction finally ignite. For a moment after my mother's brittle "Congratulations," the air in the room felt different, charged, like the pause before a summer storm breaks. Jason was the first to break it. "Well, that's unexpected," he said, stabbing at his potatoes with more force than necessary. His tone was half a laugh, half an accusation, the sound of someone trying to convince themselves the situation was still under their control. My father cleared his throat, straightened in his chair, and forced a smile that didn't fool me for a second. "It's good to see you doing something with yourself. I mean, real estate is smart." That, finally, was silent, but I heard it all the same. "I appreciate that," I said lightly, letting them think I was buying into their performance. "It's been a busy year." Busy was an understatement. They didn't know about the nights I'd been hunched over my desk until 3 a.m., balancing contracts and invoices. They didn't know about the quiet deals, the hours of research, the calculated risks. They didn't know I'd saved enough to buy this place in cash, bypassing any chance for them to dismiss it as a bank's generosity. But now they knew the outcome, and it was eating them alive. I could see my mother's mind working behind her polite expression, recalculating everything she'd told people about me. She'd have to rewrite the story, spin it so she wasn't the mother of the failure anymore. But the catch was, no matter how she framed it, the ending would be the same. I'd done what they thought I couldn't. Jason leaned back in his chair and tried again, this time with a different tactic. "Well, hey, maybe we could, I don't know, partner on something. I've been thinking about property for a while." The corner of my mouth twitched. I almost laughed. "That's generous, but I think I'll keep my investments close for now." His jaw tightened, but he didn't push it. From the kitchen doorway, I saw my aunt, who had been quietly eavesdropping from the moment I arrived, peek in with wide eyes. She knew exactly what had just happened, and the slight grin tugging at the edge of her mouth told me she was enjoying it almost as much as I was. The rest of dinner was a strained dance of forced pleasantries. Every time I caught my father's gaze, he'd look away first. My mother kept offering me more food I didn't need, as if stuffing my plate might somehow re-establish her role as the one in control. Jason chewed like his life depended on it. When dessert came, store-bought pie they pretended was homemade, I stood, thanked them for the meal, and slipped my coat on. At the door, my father shook my hand a little too firmly, the kind of grip meant to prove something. My mother kissed my cheek, whispering, "I'm proud of you," in a tone that sounded like it had been dragged out of her with pliers. I walked out into the cool night air with my hands in my pockets, the house glowing warmly behind me. They could keep their pride. I had the deed. The night air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up a little, makes every sound sharper. I stood in the driveway for a moment, just watching the warm light spilling out from their windows, listening to the faint hum of conversation inside. They were probably already talking about it. Not to me, never to me, but to each other, low and urgent, as if whispering could make the truth smaller. I could almost picture it, my mother pacing in the kitchen, her wine glass still half full, saying things like, "I had no idea he was doing that well. Why didn't he say anything?" Jason slouched in his chair, frowning into his pie, and my father leaning back with that stiff, defensive posture he used when the control had slipped out of his hands. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, not turning the key. The satisfaction wasn't loud or explosive, it was slow and steady, like the warm burn of good coffee after a cold walk. For months, I'd swallowed their comments, let their smirks roll off me, kept my head down while they shaped my life into a cautionary tale for their friends. I'd wanted to lash out 100 times, to throw numbers in their faces, to prove myself right there in the heat of an argument. But I'd waited. I'd let the story play out until the moment I could flip the ending in one clean move. And tonight, I'd done exactly that. I thought back to the moment my mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, the way Jason's smirk slipped before he could hide it, the hollow tone of my father's forced congratulations. I replayed it like a favorite song, each detail clearer the more I thought about it. They'd try to adjust the narrative. Of course they would. My mother might tell people she knew I was capable all along. Jason might start talking about how we're a family of achievers. But no matter how they twisted it, they'd remember tonight. They'd remember that I walked in as the quiet disappointment and left as the man who owned the roof over their heads. I finally started the car and drove home. My apartment wasn't much compared to the house, but for now, it was where I'd done the real work. The desk still had coffee rings from those 3 a.m. study sessions. My whiteboard was still covered in scribbled plans and crossed-out numbers. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and opened my laptop, not to work, but just to stare at the property deed on my screen. My name in bold letters. My signature at the bottom. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like proof that silence can be louder than shouting, that patience can be sharper than anger. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what they thought of me. I knew exactly who I was, and the best part was, now they did too. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: sometimes the best way to answer doubt is to let it talk itself hoarse. People will tell you who you are, what you can do, and how far you'll get, based entirely on what they can imagine for you. My family couldn't see past the picture they'd already painted, so I stopped trying to repaint it for them. I built my own frame instead. Patience was the hardest part. Every insult itched to be answered in the moment, but I kept it in my pocket, saved it for the day when my success could speak louder than I ever could. And when that day came, I didn't need to raise my voice. I just told the truth, and let it sit in the silence. So if you're sitting there with everyone expecting you to fail, remember, you don't owe them your plans. You owe yourself your results.